right there in the beginning of the Western story in Genesis, what you get is it's the story of history's first drug bust. It's the story of a woman who follows her own mind and makes a decision about consciousness alteration, and then it works. I mean, she says, and they were naked, and she perceived them as naked. In other words, she got true information about the situation. But you have Yahweh there, mumbling to himself as he wanders around the garden in an old bathrobe, and he's saying, if they eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge, they will become as we are. That was always the issue, you see. It wasn't a health issue. It wasn't an abuse issue. It's about who finds out what's really going on and who doesn't. And this book I wrote for Bantam makes very clear that the style of a culture is almost always and invariably a style of seeing the world through a certain set of drugs or a drug. For example, here we're in the middle of a drug abuse problem, but caffeine has been entirely institutionalized since the Industrial Revolution. It's the only drug that has been honored in every labor contract that is signed anywhere. You have the coffee break. The coffee break is the workers, guarantees the workers' right to stimulate themselves, and in fact, ultimately obligates the workers to stimulate themselves, because the machines and the tasks that they have been given totally reinforce the need for coffee. And the typing pool couldn't exist without coffee.
My eyes, I want to understand. That's Jackson Brown. You're listening to 101.6, 101.6, 101 Chicago Rock Radio. Not really. You're listening to Green Crush with Alan Park. This is our show today. Now, I'm cutting in before we get to the theme song because, unfortunately, I have some good news and some bad news. And when I say unfortunately, I, of course, mean that the unfortunate part is the bad part. We're live. We don't have Wi-Fi today, so we've had to do a bunch of other things to get us around the starting late hump. And before we get to our wonderful guest today, Jenny Hallam, she's in Australia standing by. Thankfully, that's not part of our technical issue. We've had all kinds of technical issues with every single show. What have we done, like 35 shows? And there's been a problem with it every step of the way. And today, we all of a sudden don't have Wi-Fi. So how is this coming live to you on YouTube right now? It's not. Unfortunately, you're not looking at it on YouTube right now. It's not possible for you, and I don't want to hear anyone tell me they saw it live in the moment at just after 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, because it's not possible. You're listening to this straight up as a podcast. And thanks for doing that. That's one piece of bad news. The other piece of bad news is, and we will be spending much time on this later, is that an upcoming guest that we have booked for the end of the month, February 27, Sam Malachi. He is a doctor. He is an author. He is a grower of cannabis. And he was on his way to Toronto about 10 days ago and was flying in to release and talk about his new book, which is called The Great Cannabis Conspiracy. So that's right up our alley. And then I found out he was even a fan of some of the nonsense I used to perform on television and comedy and the CBC or whatever that company's called down there. Tries to put out funny shows here and there. Manages sometimes. Anyway, he was a fan of that, and we were looking forward to speaking with Sam and getting the word out and everything he has to say, which is he's probably one of the most knowledgeable people on the topic of cannabis that you're ever going to come across. And unfortunately, on the flight over here from where he was coming from, I believe Vancouver, to Toronto, he was felled by a stroke. And How about that? You've had a life where you've had cancer, where you've been a cannabis farmer, where you've done all kinds of incredible things, helpful things. I was so looking forward to meeting this man, and it's not about what I was looking forward to. It's about how tragic it is for someone of anyone. But this guy is a treasure trove of information. And unfortunately, the way things sit right now, he's on the dark end of a long fight, of course. And he will be, I'm sure, with his caring loved ones around him, taking the best source of cannabis he can find into his body, helping his brain. Let's hope. It's very upsetting to talk about these things whenever we have a loved one taken by some sort of horrible illness, but the instantaneous, rather shocking nature of this has left us at the show quite flabbergasted and upset about that, because I'm getting kind of sick and tired of a lot of great people hitting a dark spot in their life and or shuffling on out. This sounds morbid and juvenile, but at least I admit to it that, when we lose people like David Bowie and Prince and, artistic contribution from very talented people, and we lose them due to some horrible situation, I get that that's going to happen. Everyone's going to go. But considering the architects of so much of the demise of this planet, including those that draw up restrictive, punitive cannabis laws, despite the fact that it's very effective medically. No, it's not anecdotal anymore. Shut up with that. You're on the wrong side of history. You can't win that argument with me or anybody else taking that side. You can't. But when we keep losing people like this, and we don't hear about how Dick Cheney had a heart attack the same day Donald Rumsfeld was hit by a truck. We just never get to those fantastic sort of resolutions. And that's what I just said. I admitted to being juvenile about it, because on some levels I find myself to be quite evolved, aware on a lot of different levels. But I'm not perfect and never claimed to be. And I'm telling you that I am disappointed that a lot of these monsters of society get to run around and keep on living 12 hearts later, or whatever kind of thing they can do. Architects of war, architects of sadness, controllers of freedom, and just plain old dark folks somehow get to keep on going. And it's just not fair. So to take it back to the positive, Sam Malachi, who was to be a guest on this show on the 27th of February, so that's coming up shortly, won't be here. But I said I'm not going to jettison his input into this field. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read this book, and I'm going to pick some things out of it, and I want to talk about it, and I want to get it out there. And there's no sense letting his fantastic research and awareness leave us in a place where we don't know about that book. So, in fact, we do have a guest stepping in Sam's stead. And you may or may not know who he is, but I can tell you a couple of things about him. Number one, he's a prostate cancer victor, such as myself. He used cannabis for a lot of his life and found it to be very healing at the dying or very ill stages of his life. And Dr. Sam was his doctor. So he knows Sam personally. His name is Paul Hartman. He is the brother of famous comedian Phil Hartman. And I spoke with him on the phone today, and it is going to be a hell of a series of shows that Paul is going to step up and fill in for Sam. So that'll be coming up at the end of the month, February 27. My best thoughts, and the team at Crush, all three of us are hoping for the best, and a lot of things can happen regarding stroke recovery, and we think Sam is going to have some of the best possible medicine, and he's coming at it from a very difficult place. So, Sam, hang in there, please, and don't leave us yet. Meanwhile, Paul, myself, several other people are going to be involved in a fundraiser for Sam both to get the word out about Sam and the fact that he needs our help now after providing so much informational help for the rest of us. So that's going to happen. And Paul's involved. A lot of people are involved. I'm happy to be on board. I don't even know in what capacity I will be on board, but this man needs to be have attention drawn to him because he needs help, and he has been helping us. So that really is the whole story. And about an upcoming guest that we are not going to be able to... He was going to sit right here. He's going to sit right here across from me. He was coming to Toronto, and he's in a Toronto hospital now. So Paul will be coming down from where he lives to sit right here, and we will do the best we can to highlight Sam's legacy and hope for a turnaround and get the word out about his book. So in the meantime, now that we have that out of the way, before I tell you a little bit more about our show with Jenny, Hallam, and a few other points that we need to cover, it would feel strange if I didn't actually roll the theme. So if you've heard it and you know it and you love it or you hate it, whatever you have to do, maybe it's time to put things on pause or get yourself a drink of freshly squeezed cannabis juice from the plants you're growing in your house that you didn't ask permission for because you really shouldn't need to ask permission, and you ran them through a juicer, and you don't get high from it anyway. But there are so many healthful properties in there. Maybe you made ice cubes out of them to put into your smoothie. We're talking about a deprived food substance, and it's a fantastic thing to take into your body. So just let me gather my thoughts for a little bit. We've had some technical issues. I haven't run the theme, so here it comes. You're listening to Green Crush Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park. We'll be right back. Will we?
Alan,
Ladies and gentlemen,
you having a nightmare? What if it's true?
ladies and gentlemen,
Alan, it's a possibility, isn't it?
the very word secrecy is repugnant
Secrets.
in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers
Constant, extreme danger.
which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger
Extreme danger.
that an announced need for increased security
This is Conspiracy Queries with Alan Park.
will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control.
You're crazy.
And no officious, high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes,
Isn't the Pentagon suspicious that all the buildings would blow up?
or to withhold from the press and the public
I think you're just looking at things for the first time.
the facts they deserve to know.
You've had your whole f***ing life to think things over. What good's a few minutes more gonna do you now?
The facts they deserve to know. They deserve to know. Deserve to know.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for giving me that little bit of time at the front end. Live is weird. Live means, well, we don't have 6 more hours to fix this thing. Just do it. So, I'm trying to get it done. Hey, friend of the show, can we say that? Ross Rebliati was on. He's a snowboarder. Years ago, he was able to win a gold medal for snowboarding, the very first time they launched that as an event, and he wins the gold medal. And then they took it away from him because they detected cannabis in his body. Then they gave it back to him because they realized that was bullshit. So that's neat. He was on the show. Very good response to Ross. He's got Ross's Gold, which is in Kelowna, and you can help yourself to some of his fine wares up in the beautiful hills of BC, the mountains up there. Oh, my God, it's a lovely place to live and be around. That's where Ross is. And it turns out he's got a movie out now. Here's the trailer for it. This is on tsn.ca. It's Sports Network, the Sports Network of Canada. And they've got a little story about Ross called Higher Ground. Shot 2 decades after he became the first. Well, everything I just told you. I didn't tell you it was in Nagano, Japan. But anyway, he was beset with this stigma, right? So even though he got to keep his gold medal, a lot of people hated him because he was a bad person because he was taking cannabis. You know, and those people are awful. So now, of course, as things turn around and we understand the mindset, the old school parochial mindset that this is a terrible substance is fiction. I'm sure Michael Phelps, who's won about 27 gold medals swimming in a pool, also a consistent cannabis user, can also tell you it hasn't slowed down his athletic prowess or mindset. But here's the trailer for Ross Rebliati called Higher Ground, for the movie called Higher Ground. So here we go.
Wow. What's that smell?
He's going to grow up there.
That's the smell of cannabis.
TSN original program.
Tonight out of Nagano, Japan. Canadian Olympic gold medalist Ross Rebliati,
who won the gold medal in snowboarding, has tested positive for
marijuana metabolite, a drug subject to certain restrictions.
A passive amount of marijuana.
The only explanation he can give is secondhand.
The athlete Rebliati Ross is disqualified and excluded from the 18th Olympic Winter Games.
What we're dealing with here is the reality of an athlete being stripped of a medal.
The powerful stigma of cannabis played its part. I stopped snowboarding. I isolated myself. I had to reinvent my whole life.
Yes, sir. He had to reinvent his whole life. And yeah, that stigma sucks. That is a powerful factor. I know when I was stricken with stage 4 cancer, if you're just joining us now, you're listening to a show coming from a guy who had stage 4 cancer and maybe still has it. They won't take that label away. But I had the fear running through me, not only of dying soon, as was promised. And as I take a look around the world today, I kind of feel upset about that promise not being carried through, to be honest with you. But when that promise didn't happen and I was using cannabis, when I first started to use the cannabis, I didn't want anyone to know I had cancer because I didn't want to put myself into a position where people are upset thinking, oh, God, that guy's got cancer, don't hire him. So I kept it hidden, and I also kept hidden that I was treating it with cannabis because it was illegal, and I didn't want to get in trouble. And I didn't want any extra attention of being a rabble-rouser and a bad person. I really was thinking those things. And then as the cannabis started to improve its take on my physical being and illness that was said to be 100% guaranteed downhill more quickly to the end until there was nothing I could do, started to reverse. To hell with my promise to myself to keep it quiet and to not share it with anybody. That was from a different mindset. I was like, I cannot hide this. I can't pretend that I'm not getting this kind of advancement. I'm going to meet someone at a place, and he's going to say, oh, wow, I've got prostate cancer, and they say I'm going to die. What am I supposed to do, keep that a secret? Oh, that's too bad, buddy. That wasn't possible. So I've had to turn my life around in the face of it. And I've had to endure a lot of criticism and negativity and lies, and I have to listen to this mantra from the mindless about how it's all anecdotal. And Just full-on garbage from, what do they call them? Haters. Haters and critics. And I'm not alone. Here's this gold medalist who, even though they reinstated his medal, he had a world of shit to wade through. Social withdrawal. They tell you that cannabis keeps you socially marginalized from your peers. Yeah, well, I guess so. If they believe a bunch of nonsense, and so do the rulers, the leaders. I hate using that word. It's so not true. And we'll spend some time today on why that is. But you really have to rebuild your life. So what I'm trying to recommend right now to people is, I never tell people what to do because apparently there's some legal shenanigans surrounding that whole idea of giving advice. So what I like to say is, boy, if that happened to me, here's what I would do. So if I just got a terrible medical revelation, such as cancer or a liver disease or a brain condition, some kind of problem, before the medical teams of allopathy could come crash carting down the hall with their invasive fix of surgery or what have you, I recommend that to myself, by the way, just to myself, nobody else, I would recommend that what I would do, given that horrible news, is to start to jack up on this oil as quickly as possible. And no, let me clarify something else, not just CBD oil. I understand it's very helpful. It's a very healthful property. It's part of the whole package. But there is a moralistically driven, and when I say that, I mean artificially moralistically. I mean because you are a Catholic or because you are of some other faith that enshrines shame and fear into your belief system, which has weaseled its way into our judicial system. But you will have a fear of doing this for sure because you're already scared of the disease. But you can't possibly cave into the mindset of those that don't know what they're talking about, who don't believe it works as well as it does in the front. They don't believe this thing, this word they bandy about like it means anything. How about the research? How about the facts and the data before you? Never mind drawing laws up from what you believe, officer. It needs to be what is. And so this is the distillation. This is the trickle-down effect of too much moral thinking, which is false morals. That, okay, you're going to use the cannabis for your illness, but don't use the THC. That, if you can avoid that, that's an immoral thing to do. Just take the CBDs from it, okay? And you're getting this recommendation from people who don't understand the entire synergistic whole plant effect of all of the things at the same time, the terpenes, the CBD, the THC. And if you're taking a plant that has a certain percentage of THC one time and then a different plant with another percentage, it doesn't matter. Just take it all in, is what I would say to myself were I to be restricken. So, let's spend a bit of time on this particular sad story, which is that there are potholes ahead. Potholes ahead, according to theglobeandmail.com, in Canada. And talk about more fiction. Potholes ahead. Our police are preparing to crack down on driving while high, folks. So yeah, if you're sitting there like in one of those old Cheech and Chong movies, just ripping a giant cone and there's a fog inside the car, you're probably going to get understandably taken aside, and you're going to crash that thing. There's going to be a problem. I understand that. We don't need people doing that. We need people understanding exactly how this compound works and when you're not impaired. The problem is the arbitrary nature of lining up cannabis with alcohol for this purpose, but then you can't have as much access to it as alcohol. So now it's different. Oh, it's just like cigarettes because blah blah blah, and then it's like, well, it's not like cigarettes where you can walk around smoking them outside. No. And they keep changing the rules around. And the big problem with impairment and cannabis is the science is, the fact is, and you can even test this on one person, and I have with myself, is that depending on your awareness and tolerance, let's say, the tolerance to the actual compounds builds up over time. And some people can take more of it in than other people. And taking in almost any amount is going to register that you have cannabis in your system. You're carrying cannabis in your system. It's part of your system. But it's not like alcohol trying to leave your system as quickly as possible. It's a friggin' nutrient. So it's trying to stay there. So what I'm saying is by the time someone tests positive for a certain level of cannabis in their system, there's no scientific bearing on whether or not they are impaired. Now, let me give you a quick example of how this can be the case and is the case. And I know there's a lot of people thinking, well, that's nonsense. Of course, if you have more, you're higher. No. When you begin to take the Rick Simpson oil, for example, you start off with a tiny amount, what I like to call a pinhead. This is a half or a third the size of 1/2 of 1 grain of uncooked white rice. That is the size that you're dealing with. And if you accidentally double that and you have a couple of pinheads at the beginning of your ingestion procedure, you are going to be high. You are going to be too high and not ready because you have not yet properly acclimatized as per the best charts and dosage charts available to understand how to take this property in without getting all messed up and high and not ready to operate a vehicle or brush your teeth for that matter. Okay, so you can have a small amount of this cannabis oil, test positive for cannabis in your system, and pretty much be on the moon in how high and how affected you are. And then over time, as you're slowly building up your acclimation and your system is now understanding the ways and means of how the cannabis acts in your system, you can take more cannabis oil. You would be testing higher for how much cannabis was in your system, and you wouldn't be necessarily impaired at all had you been building up slowly. You know, it's like the kid who's 18, 19 years old, has his first drink at a bar. You toss a shot into him, and he's on his face, right? Somebody else is drinking 5 or 6 beers and a couple of shots, and they're still walking around doing all right. They're not ready to drive, but still. So this whole notion that if you're testing a certain amount that you're impaired and we're going to give you a ticket and you're going to jail for 14 years, again, is based in belief. The belief that you are high. And they're not seeming to try to come up with any solid science to prove it because they've just got to bust you and they've just got to keep their jobs and they've just got to put you through the legal system and none of this shit's changing from before. So that's my basic complaint, and that's what your basic complaint should be. So no, I'm not advocating getting ripped on a bong and jumping in your vehicle and heading down the highway. I'm saying that the means of measurement, the beliefs involved in the official system that you are already so high if you have a certain amount in your system is folly. Okay, it's complete nonsense. So now let's go to this particular special of the Globe and Mail. Came out the end of January. It says, things are more than a little hazy as Canada prepares for the legalization of marijuana at some unspecified date this summer. Of course, Justin's been punting that down the road since he got elected. Next July. I don't know who said that. You said that. Your team said that. But while many details are still... Now, why does this guy keep writing ahem in here? Ahem up in the air. One thing is clear. Police forces across the country are expecting a big increase in driving while high cases. In jurisdictions that have legalized marijuana, there has been an increase in cannabis usage while driving, says Sergeant Ray Moose of the RCMP. The facts bear that out. The number of Colorado drivers who tested positive for marijuana use jumped 145% from 2013 to 2016. Marijuana was legalized there in 2014. So right there, it says it. The facts bear it out that Colorado drivers who tested positive for cannabis use, okay, fine. There's nothing in there that says they are impaired. It's two different things and can be the same thing, but just because it's one doesn't mean it's the other. That you're testing positive for use doesn't mean you're all messed up. Is that clear? Do the people who like to argue against this point even comprehend this basic sentence that I'm saying, or are they clinging to an argument the other way because they believe things that they're told. A study released last summer reported that the number of collisions reported to insurance companies in Washington State, Colorado, and Oregon is 3% higher than what would have been expected if those states had not legalized marijuana. Okay, fine. Now you're getting into the, yeah, but what else did it do? How many of those people eliminated illnesses? You're just gaming the facts here, big boss, big brother. Scarier yet, because it's all about fear, isn't it? Scarier yet is a recent Health Canada survey showing 39% of cannabis users polled said they had driven within 2 hours of smoking up. And once again, I say, just because you have a certain amount of cannabis in your system does not mean you are impaired. It's not alcohol. Oh, sure, you want to compare it to alcohol in several different ways, but they don't want to appreciate that it's different on this front. They want to control it the same way. They want to distribute it and profit from it the same way, but they don't want to admit the differences along the way. These people are gaming the system. So with that in mind, Canadian police forces are gearing up for what's expected to come when cannabis is legal. While much of what police forces do won't change, because they didn't really decriminalize it, charging those who drive while high on drugs has been enforced for decades. Yes, it has. There is already a lot more emphasis on those who get behind the wheel after smoking marijuana. Emphasis, but no data. The RCMP, for one, have stepped up training with the proposed law in mind. That's aimed at giving our officers a better ability to detect cannabis impairment as well as other drug impairments. While the techniques are pretty much the tried and true, looking for unsteadiness, dilated pupils, lack of focus, and so forth, police do have one new tool in their arsenal. That's been a substantial increase in the number of drug recognition evaluators across the country, and police forces are expecting to triple the number of evaluators by the end of next year. These are trained officers who make the final call on whether to lay impaired driving charges after a driver has been taken off the road. They conduct thorough tests to determine level of impairment. It's a 12-step evaluation process where there are over 100 pieces of information obtained, says Corporal David Botham of the RCMP. The evaluation includes tests of body temperature, muscle tone, and attention abilities. Once the expert has decided the driver is impaired, and they won't be biased at all, by the way, and can identify the drug, he will order a blood or urine test to confirm the drug or drugs involved. Through all these different training initiatives and through our past and current training, we are confident we'll be in a position to tackle all forms of impaired driving. This proposed law, Bill C-46, offers one new tool, if approved by the Senate, and it will be. It will empower officers to use oral fluid screening devices to detect the presence of drugs. That's basically a spit test using a swab to determine the level of drugs in the driver's system, and once again, I'm telling you that it doesn't matter how much is in the system if you've already built up a tolerance. But we don't talk about that part. Although the standards have yet to be finalized. And while not all of the Canada's legislation is clear yet, one thing is evident. Those caught driving high, and again, they haven't shown how they'll do that, will pay a severe price. The proposed law dictates that as little as 2 nanograms of THC per milliliter can result in charges and fines of up to $1,000. Anything over 5 nanograms could land you in jail. Several provinces have stepped up penalties in anticipation of legalization. Insurance companies are ready to make offending drivers pay, although they are waiting for the law to pass before setting the standards. But existing penalties are fairly onerous for impaired drivers. And it goes on, if you're under 21 and you've been convicted, your car insurance premium may cost more than your car. Noting that once you get your license back, you could be paying an annual premium of up to $12,000. Ah, the freedom. I can just smell it. Now, I'm not sitting here advocating that we're all supposed to get bottled up out of our gourd and drive around and crash into people. I am telling you that the science that they are relying on is gamed, not complete, insufficient, and one of the things they sat around for months and months and months trying to figure out how to still profit from, how to still generate police man hours, how to still avoid detracting from the budget, instead of going the other way. You're decriminalizing something. It shouldn't be that big of a deal. Let's focus on education so that people don't want to drive or have anything to do with it at the time they are impaired. But no. We have to keep on feeding the sick police state. And how else? How else should we treat it? Now, I'm going to move on to another story from cannabisdaily.co, our good old friends at cannabisdaily.co. And this is in the States, of course. There's nothing like this proposed in Canada whatsoever because of the negative mindset of those ushering in this new control paradigm. But hey, San Francisco is going to drop all cannabis-related convictions since 1975. 43 years of bullshit going to go away. Now, if you did time and you got punished and you got broken up from your family, there's not much you could do about that right now, but they're going to make some kind of reparations. This is exciting. This is in cannabisdaily.co. Now that recreational cannabis is legal in California, the next logical step. Do you hear that, Justin? Do you believe Justin and Kathleen and Officer Bill Blair, who's still a cop even though he's the minister of controlling cannabis? How about these for beliefs? I believe you should also incorporate a similar system, especially when these fat cats are going to get rich on the same deal. That's what San Francisco is going to do, according to the city's district attorney, when he announced the city's prosecutors will be wiping out or reducing cannabis-related criminal convictions going back to 1975. According to District Attorney George Gaskin, San Francisco will immediately dismiss nearly 3,000 misdemeanor convictions that date back to 1975, as well as wipe clean arrest records for those who had faced such charges. And meanwhile, in Canada, we're still arresting people that are using this because if you're buying it now and getting it from a dispensary now, Chuck Raffici and some other fat cats that are already balls deep invested into this clandestine industry that be sitting in back rooms and planning how to invest and how to make money and how to control for such a long time, they don't want this. Okay, they don't want to admit this. It's too bad. They better wake up to it. The city of San Francisco also intends to review nearly 5,000 weed felonies that had been recorded during the same time period. In inappropriate cases, they'll be resentenced to misdemeanor offenses. Gaskin said at a news conference that this is the city's way, and Canada should be doing the same, and any other repressive regime should be doing the same. You need to address the wrongs caused by the failures of the country's war on drugs for many years and start to fix some of the harm done, especially to communities of color. And Justin and company, you can start doing that right now by stopping arresting people who are using a healthful substance. Cannabisdaily.go, sorry. Now, we are talking about the Prime Minister of this country, Justin Trudeau. This is the guy that insists that we keep on arresting people while the more intelligent of us on the planet are deciding to expunge old cannabis records because none of that's going to make sense anymore. What do you think costs more? What do you think costs more? Maintaining all of these arrests that they do in Canada so they can go into a courtroom and some intelligent judge washes the whole thing clean and they've wasted all the time and the man hours? Well, when you have a prime minister that says things like this to folks who have loyally served this country and gone off to some other hellhole to get their leg blown off, like this particular gentleman who stood up in a town hall to say, hey, I just want to know what's going on, man. I've had my leg blown off. I don't get any support from you and your government. And I want to know why you're fighting us in court to not pay us what you're supposed to pay us. You know how when they send someone off to war, they say, oh, well, we got to get behind the troops. And then when they come home messed up and injured, they say, oh, well, don't really want to talk about the troops. That's not really support. Anyway, listen to this guy now. He's at a town hall with our leader, and it's on the bubble of what I'm talking about here. This isn't about cannabis, but it's about the mindset of someone who is so against cannabis and so wrong on so many levels. It's kind of ridiculous. But here's this injured vet standing up and asking why it is the government is fighting the vets for their deserved and agreed to benefits. Listen to this guy.
Why are we still fighting against certain veterans groups in court? Because they're asking for more than we are able to give right now.
Justin, are you kidding me? More than you are able to give. That's why you're fighting this guy with one leg. That's more than you're able to give right now. To see through the health and the best possible welfare of somebody that laid his life down in some shit zone that you were saying was a good idea to go visit at the time. And when you didn't blow your legs off, it was really important we send this guy over there. But now they don't have money to address it. Where do they get the billions of dollars to pump into foreign countries? Canada pumping billions of dollars into foreign countries. Where do they get the money to help beef up the Jordanian army? Did you say the Canadian army? No, I said the Jordanian army. Why is Justin Trudeau blowing millions of dollars trying to repatriate ISIS fighters? This is not the same category as a foreign refugee trying to come in who's been displaced by foreign fighting. This is a guy who is a foreign ISIS fighter. And you got some money for that guy, got some money for that guy, just don't have money for the guy that tried to stop the ISIS fighter who had his leg blown off. And then you get into the offshore tax havens of which billions of dollars are absconded by people such as, the finance minister of the country, Bill Morneau, Morneau. Check him out on the Paradise Papers, #Paradise Papers, Bill Morneau, scam artist. This is the guy imposing a regressive tax system at the same time he's profiting from an offshore haven. And this putz doesn't have money to pay for this guy's leg? These are the people making the decisions that using cannabis is only going to cause problems. I say we have enough problems already with their avowed non-use of it. Thanks, Justin. Oh, that's just a one-off thing. He doesn't say things like that all the time. Well, I think he does, actually. Listen to what he says after this. A young gal in another town hall takes issue with what he has to say, and she rounds herself out quite nicely. And you'll hear the point, and then you'll hear Justin tacking onto not the main point, but some other stupid, ridiculous point, and it actually came out of his mouth. And, you don't even need to write jokes anymore. You just need to quote people. Check this out.
So that's why we came here today to ask you to also look into the policies that religious charitable organizations have in our legislation so that it can also be changed, because maternal love is the love that's going to change the future of mankind. So we'd like you to look into
we like to say people kind, not necessarily mankind.
Okay, so you got to be kidding me. We like to say people kind now. Did you know that? I didn't know that. My leader just told me that we like to say people kind, not mankind. Not mankind because that's sexist. It's sexist. And even though there's another word called humankind to address that particular contention, this clown has the word people kind. I posted that on Facebook, and people thought I was being sarcastic in a people kind of sarcastic way. Once again, I'm telling you, this is the mindset of a man who doesn't seem to realize that lawyers are considering legal action if the Liberal government doesn't overturn past convictions for marijuana crimes. So if we don't do what San Francisco is doing, I'm happy to say that in straight.com, there's a great article in there about me, actually, from last year. Check it out. straight.com, and then Google my name, and there you go. Lawyers in Toronto are considering taking legal action to push the federal government to grant amnesty for past marijuana crimes. There are lawyers who are coming together to consider that as an option if the government is slow. And I think we know the government is slow. And we have a slow leader, said Anthony Morgan, a lawyer with Falconers LLP, quoted in a Canadian press story, also in the Globe and Mail. The Georgia Straight first asked Justin Trudeau about overturning past convictions for crimes related to cannabis when he was just a candidate for prime minister. He did give the impression that he was going to kick this thing through and he was a social justice kind of avenger on this topic, but now he's turning into Stephen Harper 2.0. At a Vancouver campaign stop in August 2015, just before the election of October, Trudeau said it would be something a Liberal government would discuss as part of what was then an election pledge to legalize and regulate it. And what were they discussing? They were discussing expunging past criminal records, while they're now busily creating them. Still arresting people. That's something we'll be looking into as we move forward, Trudeau said back then. There have been many situations over history when laws come in that overturn previous convictions, and there will be a process for that We will set it up in a responsible way. The Canadian Press published in February this year a story providing an update on where that conversation stands. Last month, Safety Minister Ralph Goodale said the government was looking at the legal implications of amnesty but refused to provide a time frame. Well, it's not bloody well right now. There's guys getting busted right now today, somewhere, in a dispensary somewhere. The article also quotes Bill Blair, the head police chief who is in charge of legalizing cannabis, the federal government's lead on marijuana legalization, suggesting the Liberals will consider pardons, but not until after recreational cannabis becomes legal in July 2018. Now, Bill Blair says it's going to be July. Justin says, I don't know when it's going to be, and I don't know where we're getting that idea from. And his old minister is telling us this. Go smoke a joint and sit down. I wish that guy was snowboarding again. That's what he used to do. He used to snowboard and teach kindergarten. Once we have put in a more comprehensive system of regulatory control for the production and distribution of cannabis, that's an issue the government will then, at that point in time, be able to turn its mind to. Suggesting that the government has a mind rather than being a drone. Okay, so now we're going to close out this particular segment before we bring on our guest, Jenny Hallam, with some fine writing by a previous friend of the show, also Harrison Jordan, who will soon be a lawyer. And he says pardoning cannabis offenders would be hypocrisy for Canada's governing party, and that's because Trudeau has basically painted himself into a corner. He says, as the government of Canada is mulling over the idea of adding pardons for cannabis offenders to the reforms of the nation's marijuana laws, it's a great idea in theory, but it makes no sense for Canada's governing party to pursue since they are set to increase the number of marijuana infractions as part of their plan to legalize recreational use. The Liberal Party plans to consider pot pardons later this year when the party holds its national conventions in April, according to a recent report from the Canadian Press. The Liberal Party has also opened up a channel to discuss pardons and other policy ideas on its website. Surely that's great news in favor of progressive policies, right? Yet at the same time, it would be absolutely hypocritical for the Fed Liberals to implement the pardons. Why? Because their upcoming bill to legalize it, Bill C-45, adds 45 new cannabis offenses to the criminal code. Folks, you got to understand this. I think there's 7 or 8 laws right now. There's going to be several times that. 45 different cannabis laws, including a law specifically criminalizing the possession of illicit cannabis. And illicit cannabis means it didn't come from the government profiteers. The purchase of even one joint from an illegal dispensary or a street dealer, if prosecuted as an indictable offense, carries a punishment of up to 5 years in prison. 5 years in prison for buying a joint off a guy at the corner. Because it's just like tobacco. Sure, there's an option for police to issue a ticket instead of arresting the individual, but that's at the discretion of the officer. So the consumer is at the mercy of law enforcement. We already know that certain segments of population feel the disproportionate impact of law enforcement include visible minorities. So that's written on civilized.life, www.civilized.life. Harrison Jordan, he'll be back in soon as we get closer and the smoke clears on some of the bullshit that these folks have been telling us about. So now we're going to turn to introducing our friend. We're going to make a friend. I've already spoken to her. Jenny Hallam. We're going to call her in a second. She's in Australia, so it's already tomorrow morning for her. This is all very confusing. Jenny Hallam. All right, this is on AustralianSeedBank.com. Jenny Hallam, last September, she's the activist who defied threat of criminal charges over CBD oil. Straight up, no weed, no THC. In a year, people should be celebrating medical cannabis legislation in Australia, and yet activists defy the threat of criminal charges. Earlier in 2017, police raided the home of oil producer Jenny Hallam in South Australia, shutting down her medical oil production, which sucks. But she's been helping people for free in Adelaide, South Australia. So there she is on the line right now. Jenny Hallam is on the line from Australia. Jenny, welcome to, I guess, really early tomorrow morning. It's still yesterday afternoon for us. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm very glad to have you on. I'm coming at this from the good end of things. I'm not trying to get you in any kind of legal trouble, but you do have one hell of a ridiculous story to share with the rest of the world in this time of legalization of cannabis, in this time of medical breakthroughs, helping people put cancer and other disastrous illnesses behind them. We've had Vera Toomey on the show from Ireland a few weeks ago telling us about all of her tribulations. I want the world to know who you are. Jenny Hallam, you are a cannabis activist, and you come at this from a place where once upon a time you never had it or used it. So if you could tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this substance and before you got into trouble, because it's so simple and yet so complicated as to why you got into trouble. So let's start with that.
Okay. Well, just like most people, I'd used it when I was younger, just recreationally, and so I knew that it wasn't anything bad. But because of different issues, I sort of gave up all drugs, and so I actually had a car accident when I was 20 myself, and I've had a few different ones since then. None of them my fault. I'm not a bad driver. Unfortunately, I'm just have very bad luck when it comes to the road. So I've been left with a body-wide pain condition that leaves me with about a 6 out of 10 pain level. So for the first 15 odd years, the doctors had me on morphine and endone, oxycodone, those sort of things, shots of pethidine, and the really horrible drugs, and they weren't working. It wasn't really doing a lot for the pain, but it was making me really sick, and I got down to about 38 kilos, so that's basically like a child's weight, and I was going to die. My doctor said to me, there's not much we can do anymore to keep the weight on. He just didn't know what to do anymore. And so some friends had come over to visit, and they'd bought some weed with them, and they were just having a smoke, and they sort of said to me, look, just try some, just have a go and try some. It'll make you feel a bit better. So so I had some, and for the first time in about 2 years, I ate a full meal that night. I didn't have any sort of appetite before that, and I was always feeling nauseous and just didn't really feel like eating. But that night, I straight away ate a full meal, and then I slept the full night through, and I hadn't done that for years.
Right.
And I was just amazed. I just couldn't believe it. So the next day I had some more, and then the next day I felt better again. So I thought, well, that's it. I'm just going to keep using it. So, even though it was illegal and, I knew I could get in trouble for it, it was worth it because I was going to die the way I had been. And this literally was saving my life. So I had been told by the doctors and the pain clinic that I wouldn't have children, that I would be in pain for the rest of my life, and that I wouldn't work anymore. I'd never work again. And I managed to prove them wrong, and I got a job as a waitress, and that's a pretty hard job if anyone knows what it's like to waitress.
Sure.
So I got back to waitressing, and then I got my own business and just started getting better and better, and that was just from smoking it. And I was just amazed from that.
Are you
that was
serious?
just from
I
smoking.
did not know that. You were just smoking it, and you were getting this much of an improvement.
Yeah, that was just from smoking it. Smoking it saved my life. And that's why I keep sort of saying to people, if that's the only way you can get it into you, then do it. Anyway, so then I heard about a guy, his name's called Tony Bauer, and he was the first person making oil here in Australia. And he was doing it mainly for kids with epilepsy. So I contacted him and asked if he would be able to help me. And he sort of explained that he couldn't. And now I understand why. Now that I'm sort of in the same position, I sort of totally understand. But I sort of said, okay, no worries. And so I went away, and it took me another 5 years before I sort of found groups that were sort of talking about making the oil themselves. And, these were online Facebook groups. So I had before I even started making the oil, I had started to try and get it legalised, and I had started trying to work with some of the politicians. But our health minister here in the state that I live in was refusing to speak to anybody in regards to medicinal cannabis, and was just putting us off to the substance abuse minister.
Did they give a reason why? Did they say why they didn't want to talk to you?
No, they just put us off to that. They just said that they wouldn't discuss it as a health issue, that we needed to discuss it with the substance abuse minister. And I refused to discuss it with her because she didn't agree with cannabis. She thought it was as bad as cocaine and the other drugs, and didn't think people should be using it medicinally. So I thought there's no point speaking to her, and I didn't want to speak to them anyway. I wanted to speak to the health minister. It was a health issue. So I got very frustrated, and in the meantime, I'd learnt actually from a friend of mine from Canada that you guys over there were making a cannabis-infused coconut oil.
Right.
And so that was the first one I started to make. And I changed the recipe around a little bit and, made it a little bit better and started off with that one. And that's the one I started using for myself at first. And within 5 months, I was off all of my pharmaceutical medications. So during the time that I was smoking it, I was still using the morphines and those sort of things. But I think it was more of a crutch because in my mind, they had been the only thing that had worked. And I was still a little bit scared of going off that. So, but once I got the oil and I realized how much better that was, they just fell away. And so, like I said, within 5 months, I was off all pharmaceutical medications, and that was including antidepressants, all the opiates, everything, absolutely everything. And I was better than I had ever been, and everyone had noticed. So my family had noticed, my friends had noticed, and they were all saying to me, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" So I said, "I'm using cannabis oil," and they were all a bit surprised, and because it was strange at the time, it wasn't really a normal thing. So then a few people that were like a few friends and family that were ill themselves said, "Well, look, can I try some? Have you got enough?" And I said, "Yeah, I've got heaps of it." It was to the point where making it just for myself, I had so much that I was getting to the point I was actually throwing it away because the coconut oil only lasts 3 months.
Oh,
Yeah,
that
so the
hurts
coconut
my
oil,
feelings.
yeah, well, I wouldn't. Well, actually, I wouldn't throw it away, but I couldn't use it for humans orally. So that's when I started giving it to animals, and started using it on animals and using it as just a rub on and those sort of things. But I couldn't use it orally anymore. So I would have to make a new batch for myself orally. So I did end up with quite a bit of it. So I started helping people's dogs and animals, and then I started helping other family members and friends, and then they got better, and so their friends and family members would ask and say, "What are you doing?" And so it sort of started to get around just word of mouth to start off with. And so at the time of my raid, when the police came to raid me, I was helping probably about 200 people.
Just before we
And
get to the
that had-
raids, let's hear a little bit about what kind of conditions you were treating dogs with and friends and family. Was it all cancer, or what kinds of things were you finding it to be effective with?
It was absolutely everything, almost every condition there wasn't many that I hadn't treated. So one of the best ones that it was working for was the epilepsies. This was at the time, this was just the coconut oil I'd started with. So we found with the cannabis-infused coconut oil, it was reducing the swelling on the brain. So it was not only stopping the seizures, so these kids were having the 100 seizures a day down to nothing. But it was also waking them up. So the damage that the previous seizures and the other medications had done, it was fixing that. So it was reducing the swelling on the brain, and these children were actually waking up. So these kids were non-verbal before and were basically just vegetables. They would sit there with their tongue hanging out, drooling, and they would not would not be able to communicate with their families. And they actually changed, and they went to the point where they were making eye contact, and then they started tracking with their eyes, and then they started verbalizing, just grunts and things like that. And then it got to the point where these kids were speaking, and then they were waking up. And this is when it started happening with like lots and lots of different children. That's when I realized there's something here. It's not just a fluke. There is something about this oil that is good.
Right. And you were using it on
and so-
kangaroos as well. Sorry for my non-Australian interest in the roos, but you
Yeah,
actually had kangaroos that were not doing well, and you reversed that with some applications of the oil.
Yeah, well, I had one kangaroo that had broken its tail, and you have to be very careful with the medications that you give animals because they can get very sick from it. So the medications that you give kangaroos can actually kill them if you give them just just slightly more than what they're supposed to have, and a lot of them are sort of are very funny with them. So rubbing the oil onto the tail of the kangaroo took the pain away without having to use anything orally or or any of the other medications that were going to hurt it. So that's one of the great things. With dogs, we were actually using it orally as well. We had dogs with cancer and dogs with epilepsy and those sort of things. So we were using it sublingually with the dogs, and we were having fantastic results with those. And we actually managed to save quite a few runts. I knew a few different breeders, and it started off with just one breeder who had a runt, and it wasn't feeding, and it'd been sort of pushed away by the others, and it was just sort of curled up in a corner. It was getting colder and weaker, and there was nothing they could do, and it was getting to the point where it just looked like it was going to die. So a friend of mine sort of said, "Look, is there anything I can do just to make it more comfortable?" So we just put a little tiny dab of the coconut oil in its mouth,
Yeah.
and just sort of wrapped it up nice and warm, and just sort of just, we knew that there probably wasn't much more we could do. And so we went away, and an hour later, she actually, because she'd been up all night, she'd actually dozed off and fallen asleep. And then about an hour or so later, she rang me back and was like really excited and said, "You won't believe this." I said, "What's wrong?" She said, "I woke up," and she said, "I couldn't find the puppy anywhere." And she said, "I thought maybe the mother had taken it and dumped it away from all the others." And she said, "But no, then I realised it was up. It had pushed all the others away and was on the best heat
Oh,
and was
man.
drinking."
That's amazing.
And she said,
That's amazing.
and that one ended up being the strongest and the smartest out of the whole litter. So, so then we ended up doing that with the runts of all litters of the different people that I knew, and we had that result with every other runt. They just ended up being stronger and smarter than the rest.
Well, let me ask you this on that note, and we'll get to the raids and the police and everything. But there are a lot of people. I haven't really explored the medical aspect with animals, but of course they're biological units, so why wouldn't it work? But here's my concern: when a man, in my case, 170, 180-pound man, and at the time I was a lot lighter when I started using. I was probably about 145, 150, but that's a lot of weight, and even with that weight, body mass, I'm taking a tiny initial amount of a pinhead, like I said, to slowly acclimatize. So how did you break down being able to figure out a dosage for an animal? It must be infinitely tinier, the initial dosage, because if you give them too much, they'll just pass out and flop around, and you think they're sick, but they're just really, really high. So how did you gear it down? How did you do that? Well, what kind of...
that's it. You just because I now make the two different types. I make the full extract oil, and I also make the coconut oil. So what we would do, we would start off with the coconut oil because that wasn't as strong, but we would start off with, like you said, just minute doses, just like one drop. And say a human would start off with maybe 10 drops, so it was sort of basically a tenth of what we would give humans.
Okay.
But it would also go by body weight, so I would go by body weight. So a dog that was just a little chihuahua size would only get let's say one drop, and maybe a dog the size of a Great Dane might get 3 drops. So you just sort of have to sort of go by the size of the animal as well. So but yeah, that's what basically how we had to do it. We just started off just the tiniest amount, the smallest amount that you could get in, and diluting it down as well. You start off by diluting it down as much as possible. With the coconut oil, I would dilute it down with more just plain coconut oil, or with the FECO, the full extract oil, I would dilute that down with olive oil, so that we were getting, just a diluted amount. And then as we were bringing their tolerance levels up, we would then, take away that dilution, and so that you were only just sort of getting the actual oil itself. So so it's just a matter of just being very careful and just finding ways to break it down. So
well, if you were going to give if someone here listening is going to try using this on their animal for all kinds of different reasons, their dog or their cat or what have you, what would you recommend at this point? What would you say to the person who winds up getting a dog that looks like it's going to die and is just like completely falling over and dizzy, and you think, oh my God, he's overdosing, and you get nervous about it? What's the best thing to do in that situation? Or did you not ever get to that? Were you always careful enough that never happened?
Well, no, occasionally you did. Occasionally, especially at the very beginning, you gave them too much and they would get stoned. And I had a little chihuahua. He as a puppy, he was already terribly injured. He was abused as a puppy, so he'd already had broken legs and broken tails. So he had a lot of pain conditions. So and the vets couldn't, because he had it from a puppy. The vets couldn't give him the pain medications that they had, because it just would have killed him after a few years. Yeah. So there wasn't a lot they could really do for him. So at the start, there were a couple of times when I did give him a little bit too much, unfortunately. But all that happened was he just sort of like looked at me as if to say, like, what's happening, and then just curled up in a ball on the couch and just went to sleep, and just slept for a little bit. And so when he needed to go to the toilet, he was a little bit wonky, so we would just sort of just guide him, and but he was okay. And like I said, and we learned very quickly that what is too much, and that was when we realized, okay, we really need to dilute it right down, and and do it that way. So so he probably was my guinea pig in a little bit, but he, considering the amount of pain he was in, I don't think he ever minded, because he always came back. Like, he knew he knew when I was getting the oil out. So, and this is
Right.
funny. This is a lot of people tell me this is both with the kids that are nonverbal do this as well, but also the animals tend to do this. Is they know when you're getting it out. They see when you're getting out the bottle of it or wherever you're getting it from,
Right.
and they know what it is. It's not long before they associate that is what makes them feel better, and so they stand there and wait for it, And so Max would stand there with his tail wagging.
Well, I know I do.
When I got it out.
That's
Yeah, I know I do. My tail would wag too if I
Yeah.
had one. So they know it's making them feel better. So he would come back and want more of it, and you could tell when it had worn off, and he wasn't feeling very good, and you could see that the pain was affecting him, and so to me that was worth it. Just a couple of times of getting him a little bit too stoned was worth the 2 years or whatever it was that he had of no pain. That was definitely because he changed. He went from a dog that looked like he just didn't want to be around anymore to a dog that was running around like a puppy again. And I mean like a puppy. He was this was a 15-year-old dog that was screaming around the house like a puppy. And I took him to a vet at one point when he was 16, and they did all the normal blood tests. And the vet was expecting to say to me, look, organs are about to shut down like you would normally have with a 16-year-old dog.
Sure.
And he came back to me shaking in his head, and he said, he's got the organs of an 8-year-old. I do not understand it. And I couldn't tell him at the time that I was using the oil on the dog because it wasn't at all accepted.
Right.
But the next vet I spoke to, I told, and she said, yep, she goes, I'd use it in a heartbeat.
And what was the
and she said,
determination point they used to be able to tell the organs were a lot younger than they were chronologically? How did they test that? How did they know that?
They did all blood tests. Yeah, they did all blood tests, and they said that with the levels, they get certain levels when the dogs get older, and they can tell that the organs are getting to the point where they're starting to shut down and they're not working as effectively. But they said his organs were working like an 8-year-old. That they were just still so healthy, and basically there was absolutely nothing wrong with any of his organs. They said they just could not believe it. So yeah, it was just astounding. So
that's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, I support Jenny Hallam, and you should too, listeners, because hashtag I support Jenny Hallam. Let me spell that. Hashtag I, the letter I, and then SUPPORT. Jenny is JENNY. Hallam is HALLAM. I support Jenny Hallam. You should support her, not just because she's going to help you figure out how to mend your dog or your cat or almost any biological kind of, person or not a person, but an animal. If you had a chimpanzee, or I'll bet you if you could get it into your sick goldfish, you'd probably turn that around. That'd be a bit hard to tell.
Well, we have this saying that everything with a spine has an endocannabinoid system. So unfortunately, that means there are some politicians that don't.
There you go. Yeah, well, no wonder they preach so hard against it. So, okay, so you start to realize, wow, this stuff is working on me. It's working on animals. And how far back in time are we now when you're at this realization? How many years ago?
So this was 2015 when I realised it was really going well, and I started to reach out to a few other people that I didn't know personally, and so there were a couple of people that I'd seen on Facebook that were suffering quite a lot, and one was a kid called Ben Oakley, and he had something called stiff person syndrome, which caused these horrific spasms, which were like looked the same as a seizure, but unfortunately they were conscious during it, so it was like having a taser held to your spine, and they could go up to 2 hours at a time. And so I saw him having a video of him having one of those spasms, and I actually started crying because I had those spasms when I was younger, when I'd first had my pain condition. So I knew what they were like, and they were absolutely horrendous. And basically nothing was helping this kid. He was only like 20 years old, and he'd gone from being an athlete sort of condition to basically in a wheelchair. And I was just heartbroken, and I couldn't believe it. So I contacted his father, and I said, look, I'm not sure if it will help or not, but I've got this oil, and it's helping a lot of other people with autoimmune diseases, so it might help him. And so his father thought about it for a little bit. It took him a while before they decided to use it, but then eventually they did. And then after they did, it was literally the first dose had worked, and he straight away had gotten the pain relief from it that he hadn't been getting from anything else. And so it's basically stopped these spasms. So he was having them quite regularly. And since using the oil, it's been about 2 years. He's only had about 4 of these spasms in that time, and they've only lasted for a matter of like a minute or so each.
Well, here's what Ben Oakley has to say on Facebook about all of this. This was posted by Roll On Ben Oakley. Roll On Ben Oakley. It's on Facebook. It says it's a plea for support. Now, it's just a fresh post from December 2017, December 28. He says, they say, we cannot express how important this is. We need your help to ensure that we can muster as much support to keep the incredibly generous and compassionate. And I'm also going to say sharp as a tack. God, it's 5 a.m. for you. Listen to how sharp she is, folks. This is not some stoner loser flopping around on the floor, doesn't know what she's doing. Jenny Hallam needs to be kept free from being convicted over an outdated and completely and utterly ludicrous law. And, you know, the people pushing this law are the same people thinking it doesn't do medically wonderful things. And, of course, they're ignoring the face of evidence. It says here, if there was any other situation, our Jenny would be considered a hero. And she is to us. Jenny has not only saved my life, says this Ben Oakley. She's not only saved my life, she has given me and so many others the opportunity to flourish and live again. So, Jenny, tell us why, with this kind of endorsement, with these animals doing better, with your friends and other folks that you were rubbing on with pain creams, you've found this has been a fantastic thing for your own personal health. You've been able to get off just about every single pharmaceutical you've been on other than using this oil. Tell us why you're maybe going to go to jail.
I suppose you'd have to ask the government that. And there's a lot of people asking that same question here in Australia. We were told that it was legalised medicinally. Cannabis was legalised in November 2016. But unfortunately, people still can't get access to it. So even though it has been legalised since that amount of time, only 300 or less than 300 people in Australia actually have managed to get a prescription for it. So now, as everybody knows, there are a lot more than 300 people that want to access it. In fact, there are hundreds of thousands of people that want to access it. So this is a huge problem. And basically, we're told from the government that all we need to do is go and speak to our doctors and that they can prescribe it for us. But when we go and speak to our doctors, they say to us they don't know anything about it. They don't know anything about cannabis. They don't know anything about the endocannabinoid system. And they certainly don't know anything about a product and where to get it from. So we're very disappointed in our government. We think that if they're going to say that medicinal cannabis is legal, then the first thing they should have done was rolled out education programs for the doctors so that they knew what was going on and that they knew, you know, at least what an endocannabinoid system was.
Yeah.
And that hasn't happened. So we know that they're not really too serious. So we know there's a fair bit of corruption going on, and that's why, you know, almost 2 years now or a year and a half now after they announced it was legal, we still don't have access to it. So unfortunately, because of that, people had to resort to turning to the black market and using oil from producers like myself, and that put us in a bit of trouble because the police then come and raid us and want to send us to jail. So at the moment, I'm facing charges of 9 years.
9 years.
So it's 9 years. It's 7 years for manufacturing cannabis oil. That's a major indictable offence. So that's 7 years just for that one. And there's another 2 years for the supply and possession. So together, the two of them is 9 years, and that's considered a life sentence here in Australia. So basically, how we see it is they want to give me a life sentence for saving lives. So we don't really understand why they're doing that, especially considering when they raided me, they didn't charge me straight away. It took them about 3 months before they actually laid charges. So in that time, they had enough time to find out that I hadn't been charging for it, that I had helped lots of different people, and that it had been extremely effective for these people. And for some of them, including quite a few children, it was the only thing keeping them alive at the time. And that to stop, for me to stop, would mean that these children would die. So they knew all of this, and they still went ahead and pressed charges. So it wasn't like I'd been charging, you know, exorbitant amounts of money for it and had made, you know, a profit off of all these people and had been living large on it.
Sure.
You know, basically, I had actually spent, I had saved up a house deposit to finally buy a house, and I spent that on it. And when I got to about $20,000 that I'd spent, I couldn't face it anymore, so I just stopped counting, and I just put all the receipts in a bag and just thought if I ever get arrested, I'll just give these to the police. So I've spent a great deal of money on it. And so I just sort of can't understand why they would want to keep continuing charges when, you know, really, you know, I was doing it for, you know, even though legally it might have been wrong, morally, you know, it was the right thing to do. These people were told they had no other option, that they were going to die without this medication. So, you know, I was literally just keeping them alive until a legal product was available.
Well, let me ask you this. This is incredible what you've done so far. You're just moving forward with the truth, and you're helping people out. Now you've got this spiderweb bureaucracy of nonsense in a country that's legalizing it anyway. A couple of questions for you. What do you say to people? Because I come across this all the time. A lot of us, the activists who may or may not have been in a medical situation but understand the truth. What do you say personally to anyone that says, well, you know, that's the law. You have to obey the law. What's your 1 minute answer to that kind of claim?
Well, we only get one life. So if you're told that there's nothing else you can do and cannabis is the only thing that will keep you alive, then I think it's a little bit silly to say that you'll just obey the law. To be quite honest, and we have a saying here, and I think it's been said all over the world, I would rather be illegally alive than legally dead.
Yeah.
And that's what we tell people. You only get one life. We don't get, several opportunities to come back like politicians and their political careers. So if we only get one life, we can't be mucking around with it. So if cannabis is the only thing that's going to save us, then as far as I'm concerned, stuff the law. Laws don't matter when it comes to saving a life.
Yeah, absolutely true. And let's not forget, I think you're good people, and good people disobey bad laws. And if a law is bad and wrong, if I obeyed everything I was supposed to obey, I would also be in the ground right now. And that's not anecdotal.
Exactly.
That's my story. And then there are hundreds of thousands of similar stories like this that all of us anecdotal people are not getting together at secret conferences at Davos to riddle the world with these stories where we're colluding to try to prove some fallacy. This is an individual story.
We've got medical evidence to back everything up. So we've got, doctors' reports and everything to back up what we're saying. So, when it comes to going to court, we're going to have that evidence. We're going to show what it's done for people. So, they can't keep denying it. They can try, but eventually, they're going to have to admit the truth.
Yeah, so you feel pretty confident. Now, what stage of legality? You've been to court. Where are you at legally in the process? You've been, you have to go back to court soon, and you will have a trial, or where are we at with this?
Yep. Well, I've only just answered the charge. It's been adjourned quite a few times. So I've only just been able to manage to answer the charge in the lower court. So now we're moving up to the district court next. And I'll answer the charge again there on March the 2nd. And then from there, I'll be given a trial date, which will probably be towards the end of this year. And the trial could go from anything between 1.5 years to 2 years. But there are hopes. There has been a push for the charges to be dropped, but that it's against the public interest and a waste of taxpayers' money. So there has been a push to do that, and an application has been put into the prosecution to have the charges dropped. So if that happens, that will probably happen at the next hearing. So, and also we have an election coming up just a couple of weeks afterwards. So there is a little bit of of talk that there's a possibility that those charges could be dropped. But either way, if they get dropped, that's great. If not, then we take it through the courts. We get a jury to decide whether or not I did the right thing, and so then we get to bring out all that medical evidence. So either way, we win.
Well, that's going to be great, because I think by the time, not great that you're going to get, this kind of threat, but I think by the time you need to actually address this in court, there's only more medical evidence coming out every day. Your big problem is going to be collating it all and deciding which are the most salient and powerful pieces of medical evidence you can have to put your side of the story across. So you've already got a lot of stuff. Do you share a lot of these, your medical awarenesses and revelations, the data that you have?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I teach other people how to make it because I can't help everybody now.
No.
I teach people how to make it. So I have my recipes online, and I share those with people, and I give people advice on dosing and the different conditions. And so I do as much as I can now to teach other people how to make it themselves. And one of the things that I try to tell people is how easy it is to make it, because that's one of the things that's the biggest misconception about cannabis oil in general is people seem to think that it's difficult to make. Yeah. And this is one of the things that I'm trying to teach people is especially the coconut oil is one of the most simple things to make. It's just the same as making a soup on your kitchen bench. It could be just done in a slow cooker, 24 hours, and it's just so simple, and it can literally save people's lives. So that's what I do now is I try and teach as many people how to make it themselves, as well as going around trying to educate people and also talk to politicians about getting this through. So
well, where's that website? Where's that website we can find these things?
Well, it's it's my Facebook page is Medicinal Cannabis for Australians.
Okay.
And that's my Facebook page, or you can get me on Facebook with just Jenny Hallam on there. So and it's an open page, so everybody can see what I'm doing on there. And so we just sort of share information and just teach as many people as we can. So it's just a matter of constantly educating the public, I think. So that's the most important thing that we find at the moment.
What a great point. I remember when I was starting to learn how to make the Rick Simpson oil. That's the specific blend that I use to get my things turned around. I was afraid. I was not sure how this was going to go. How flammable might it be? What kinds of problems? And I put it off. I had everything ready to go one day, and I just couldn't muster up the courage. And then the next day I said, listen, you got to do this thing. And I made it happen. But it is far more easy than anyone can imagine. It just sounds like it's going to be difficult. It sounds partially because it's illegal, partially because we're not all chemists, a lot of different reasons, but it's very simple. But can you take us through briefly, because everyone almost that I know has a slow cooker. So tell us about how, just take us through the simple process as you describe it, and just tell everybody listening right now that wants to listen to you, they're not going to research it, they'll research it later. But what do you do with your slow cooker and your coconut oil, and how much cannabis, and how does it go?
Okay. Well, what I do is a lot of people decarb their cannabis in the oven first, and I don't do that. When you do that, you're converting it all to THC, and I want to keep some of the THCA in mine. So what I usually do is I just take 1 ounce of cannabis to 1 litre of coconut oil, and I just put that in a slow cooker. I just mix it together. I leave it for 24 hours, and then I strain it and take out the solids, and then you put it in the fridge, and it's ready to go. That's it. That's as easy as it is.
How easy is that? Now, slow cookers generally have 2 temperatures, high and low. So would you put that on the high speed, high
No, we want it
temperature?
on the low. We want it on the low setting, and that way you're not decarbing all of it. You're keeping a lot of your THCA in it, and you're not decarbing it all and changing it all to the THC.
So once again, that's an ounce of cannabis, and how much coconut oil again?
1 litre of coconut oil.
1 litre.
Okay. And then another hint for people, because we know that there's all these different cannabinoids, and we, everyone always sort of concentrates on the CBDs and the THCs. Well, there's another really good one, and that's the CBN, and we're getting a lot of medical benefits out of the CBN. And normally we would only normally pull about 1% CBN out of your oil. But a simple tip is if you can age your cannabis by to 6 months and let it really dry out so that it crumbles in your hand when you touch it, you'll draw out much higher levels of CBN, and so you'll get better healing benefits out of your oil. So if you can age it, see, a lot of people will cure it and they're leaving a bit of moisture in it, and that's sort of basically sort of stuffing you up. You're not getting as high levels out of it. So if you let it age and dry a little bit, that helps. And the other thing I suggest as well is if you're making oil of any sort, whether it be coconut oil or the Rick's, because I do this Rick Simpson method as well. We just don't call it Rick Simpson oil because we know he doesn't like it to be called that unless it's him making it.
Understood.
So we call it FECO or full extract oil, but I use the same process. We found that if you use just one type of cannabis for it, then you're sort of you're limiting yourself with the cannabinoids. So if you mix together at least 2 or 3 I use up to 7 different types of cannabis in each batch, you're getting much better mix of the cannabinoid profile and terpene and flavonoid profile than you would get if you were used to use one strain alone. So if you can't pick, especially at the moment in Australia, it's very hard to be able to get individual strains for individual conditions. So if you're trying to fix a condition and you can't get a particular strain, or if in my case you're trying to help many different conditions, so you need to get a mix of different things, then if you mix a few different strains together, then you get much better oil as well.
Simple, effective, easy to do. Easy to do, and it makes completely good sense. So now that I have this liter of this cannabis that I've cooked in the slow cooker for, what did you say, 24 hours? 24 hours. So now I have this sludge, and I need to strain out the plant matter and just be dealing with the oil at that point, right? And then how do I dose that? Like how do I need a tablespoon of that, or what do I do with that? The final product.
Well, first we'll go back. The sludge that you get left behind, the actual the cannabis that's left behind, you can actually still use that. You don't have to throw that away. It's just it tastes horrible, but you can put that in the empty capsules, and you can still use that. And a lot of people just throw that away, thinking that it's no good, but it's actually stronger than the oil itself because you still have the plant matter in it there as well. You just can't. If you were using it as an oil, you don't want to chew. You don't want to be chewing it. So, but if you put it in capsules, you can still use it, and so you're not wasting that either. So don't throw it away. Put it in capsules and use that as well. But with the actual oil, you keep that it's got to be stored in the fridge, and it lasts for 3 months. And how I usually dose it is I usually start people on children. I would give 1/4 of a teaspoon. and adults I would start on half a teaspoon. And then basically what you do is, because every person's different, because it goes by not only just body weight, but also by the way people metabolize. So if they're a fast metabolizer, they'll use a lot more than if they're slow. So basically what you need to do then is every person has to adjust it personally, and they just increase it. And usually you can increase it about every 3 days, you can increase the dose. And so you basically just slowly increase the dose until you get to the level where it's working for you.
That's amazing. So that's simple and easy, folks. You have a crock pot, you've got a slow cooker, you can do this. You can get this stuff into you. You know, were I to recommend that to people individually, which I don't do. So that's incredible. So who else is involved specifically in your fight right now? You can't be doing all of this by yourself. You have a lawyer, or how does it go?
Yeah, I've got a legal team at the moment. So I've got a solicitor who does a lot of the grunt work, and I've got 2 barristers, and one of them happens to work with Julian Assange. So I'm pretty lucky. He's a pretty big human rights lawyer over here, so he's giving advice as well. So I'm really lucky with that. They're both of them are doing it pro bono for me, but unfortunately there's still a lot of costs that we have to cover with bringing experts over and those sort of things. So it's still going to be a big fight, but we're really lucky here. We've got some amazing people behind us, and we're getting more and more people. But that's what we really need is in America and in Canada, you were really lucky over there. A lot of high profile people came forward to support it, especially in America. One of the biggest things that changed people's opinions was when Jennifer Aniston stood up and supported it. And a lot of people that were real, goody two-shoes that never had touched any sort of drug before looked at it and said, well, if Jennifer Aniston can support it, then it must be okay. And this is the sort of thing that we need to have happen here. We need more people to stand up and say that they agree with people using it, and that they don't think it's a bad drug. And we've got to stop calling it a drug as well. That's the other thing that sort of frustrates me. It's a plant.
Absolutely.
It's a plant.
It is. It's a food.
And it's a life-saving plant. Yes, and it needs to be scheduled that way. And I think we need to go back to the UN and really fix it there. This needs to be, we need to just end prohibition worldwide. This whole thing where we're having to fight, each country fighting individually to try and get it through. It's just ridiculous. This should be something that's just done worldwide, and they just say, right, okay, we were wrong about this. We shouldn't have prohibited it in the first place. We're just going to end prohibition on it, and okay, people just go for it. Do whatever you need to do. That would really help. And that would save millions and millions of people's lives. But unfortunately, this isn't a perfect world, and that's probably not going to happen.
Right. Have you noticed, I don't know what they do in Australia, the way they do it here, and the way they do it a lot in the United States of America, and I guess other places too, but I'm most familiar with those 2 regions, is that they constantly go on and on about the costs of enforcement. Oh, this is going to be terrible. We're going to have to... we're going to be pulling over drivers, and there's going to be going to jail. This is going to cost a lot of money, you bad people that want to smoke this thing and take this thing, and now we're finally conceding enough. But boy, oh boy, you're causing us such a problem with your ingestion habit, and it's no good for us. We're going to have to spend so much money. And while they're having that side of the argument, they don't discuss the effect of what it's going to be doing to the medical systems of these countries. It's going to be drastically eliminating series of illnesses in so many people. You're not going to have seizures. You're not going to have nutritional deficiencies. You're not going to have spiraling towards cancer all the time, because you will have been taking medicine.
That's right. Well, we just look at just one little girl that I've been helping. Her name's Caitlin Mosley, and she's on Facebook as well. She's an activist. She's fighting for it. Her mother, Katrina, has been fighting for it. And she was having to give her daughter CPR on regular occasions, and having ambulances called out, and hospital stays. And ever since using the cannabis oil, she basically, I think she's only had the ambulance called out, I think, once or twice, and she's only had a couple of hospital stays. So that has saved already the government thousands hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical costs for just one child alone. So, can you imagine what would happen if everybody in the country was using it? It would just, the relief of their health system would just be huge. And we keep showing them the information from Colorado and places like that where it's come through, and we've already got, the evidence to show that this is the effect that it's had, and it hasn't had any bad reactions. There hasn't been any, bad reactions to it. In fact, everything everything has been really good. Crime rates have dropped. The illicit drug use has dropped. Opiate use has dropped. Deaths on the road have dropped. All of those things have been positive things. And this is what we're trying to show our government, that the sky hasn't fallen in now that we've seen it legalized in other countries. So there's, no problem in doing it here. But we think that the biggest problem is that the government and specifically the pharmaceutical companies have seen the amount of money that they've lost in the countries where it has been, and the states in America where it has been legalized, and they don't want that to happen here. So they're trying to hold on and stop it being as freely accessible as it has been in some of those other countries. So I think that's why here in Australia they're trying to stop the dispensary model so that we can't have access to dispensaries like you have in other places. And basically they just want us to have a pharmaceutical product that's only prescribed through doctors and dispensed through, we call them a chemist or a pharmacist. So they're really trying to control the way people access it. But people want to be able to have whole plant cannabis. They want to be able to vape it if they want, or smoke it, or ingest it raw. So people don't want to be told how to use it. They just want to be able to given access to it so they can use it however they want to use it.
And isn't it funny though that while you're 100% correct about this, the underlying factor in all of this is that most people want to be doing this. A lot of people are learning how to do it, and I hope a few people have gone from not knowing anything today to learning how to do a lot of great things they can help themselves with. But where is this demand and insistence all the time politically from your government, my government, the UK government, the United States? This preaching about how wonderful democracy is and the will of the people and the majority, and we're trying to help everyone. And then meanwhile, it's this sliver of idiots that are keeping it from the rest of us while they pretend to promote, we have to go and kill a bunch of people in the Middle East to promote democracy.
Exactly.
It's like, why don't you promote it at home by accepting the facts, put your beliefs on a shelf, and just let us get at this plant? Because when I go home and have a little basil and tomato pesto salad tonight, I'm going to be using plants as well without any kind of trouble or oversight from anybody else. It's the same thing. Where is that? Who's calling them out on this other than ourselves and a few other people? It's a key issue.
It is. And what frustrates me is governments are always going on about how they're trying to make the people safer, and they're doing different things to make the people safer. They want the roads safer. They want this because they want to save lives. Well, if they want to save lives, they could save hundreds of thousands of lives immediately by making cannabis accessible. And here in Australia, there have been polls done that say 97% of the population want medicinal cannabis available immediately. And not only that, 93% of the population want recreational cannabis available immediately. So that has to tell you, when the people are calling for this, but the government is still ignoring us, there is obviously some sort of problem. There is corruption somewhere, and we have it here in Australia because our Prime Minister here in Australia, his wife owns shares in the pharmaceutical companies that have vested interests in this. So this is why we're having problems here, because there's corruption that goes very high up, very, very high up to the top level. And so this is why it has happened the way it has. He instructed the health minister, the federal health minister, instead of having the laws to access it done federally, so that would be done immediately and would basically be done easily. What they did instead was they put it down into the hands of the states, and they said, okay, the states now have to organise access and figure it out. And so it caused chaos. None of the states knew what to do. Nobody wanted to be the first one to do it because, they didn't want to do it wrong. They wanted to sit back and wait for somebody else to do it first so that they could, fix all the problems that they had.
Right.
So that's what's caused the problems here. And that was done deliberately. It all could have been changed. It all could have been done on a different model, and we would have access now. But unfortunately, there is just too much manipulation. There's too much corruption, and this has to change. When our Prime Minister is bringing in laws and manipulating the system so that his own family is financially benefiting, that's when we have to start asking some questions and saying, is it acceptable that to make a little bit more money, he's allowing, so many people to die? So many people are dying. And just myself, from the people that I've been helping, at least 50 people that I was helping have died, in the time that I've been doing this. So, and in the time since my raid, there's probably been about 15 to 20. So, and some of those have been children. So, I'm really angry. I'm really, really angry that they have promised this, that they've dangled this carrot in front of people, but now they're just pulling it away every time, they're reaching for it. So this is just torture. It's just torture to the people that are the sickest and those that are dying, because they know that they don't have the time to wait around for a legal product, and the government is just putting this off time and time again.
Well, Jenny, I'm sure glad I'm on the same side of the ledger about all of this as you are, because I'd hate to take you on in an argument. You're a clear-headed woman who's got a lot of experience behind you and what you've been doing. You've seen it in animals. You've seen it in young children. You've seen it flatten people suffering from spasms and convulsions. You've seen people get up and walk around from wheelchairs. You've got people in wheelchairs telling folks how great you are and what's been going on. You weren't profiting from selling this stuff to people, and it's just completely untenable. I don't know what to do to fully rally people's awareness to go, look, this is completely backwards, and taking it for one more second, whether it's a law or not, we're done with this. I'm just trying to find out. Like, it's the same thing as Occupy. Remember the Occupy movement? And they were in New York, and they were saying, like, it's the 1% and the 99% are rallying against this. Well, is it the same thing now too? Is it the bankers in this one as well? Like, how do they manage to maintain such a hold on the control when we're all done with cries of anecdotal? I mean, this is all said and done. So, I mean,
well, basically, like I said, it's the only people that are holding this back are the ones that have got financial, interest in this. It's the pharmaceutical companies, and unfortunately, like I said, when our own heads of government have vested interest in those, pharmaceutical companies, that's a huge problem for us. That is a huge problem for us, and unfortunately, the mainstream media isn't talking about that here in Australia.
No.
They're not mentioning it. And there's a thing that as well. I don't want to get into the whole no-vax, the no-vax sort of issue, but the same Prime Minister brought in a law that if you didn't vaccinate your children, you wouldn't be able to access the social services money. So basically, it's called no vax, no pay here in Australia. And that same Prime Minister, his wife owns the company that makes those vaccinations. So he brought in a law that basically, benefited his own wife's company. So this is the sort of conflict of interest that is happening here. And the same woman, his wife, also just the company that she owns, has shares in, also released a new cancer drug that they're using now in Australia. So now if we were to use medicinal cannabis, people won't be needing her cancer drug either. Right. So, these are sort of things. Now, she also has shares in the company that makes Epidiolex. Now, Epidiolex, we know, is, just basically a CBD dominant version, and it isn't really effective. We know that it's already been proven that it's only 10% effective in epilepsy, yet that's the drug that they're using for the epilepsy trials here. Now, it's failing already. Now, we knew that it would fail because they've already said it's only 10% effective. So why not use a product that we know is at least 80% effective? Why use that product? Well, we know why. It's because it's her company that makes that one. So they've just signed a contract for using Epidiolex in one of the states in Australia here for 7 years. So like I said, there is massive, conflict of interests, and this needs to be addressed. And while these people are making more and more money, Australians are dying. And this is what we need to stand up and say that this is enough. Enough is enough. And we're going to stand up and say we're not going to put up with this anymore. And we've got elections coming up, and people need to start voting smart. They have to be intelligent with where they're putting their votes. They have to really look into the different parties and what their policies are on cannabis, and really think about what they're doing, because we had our last federal election and people just voted for whoever they thought was a friend of theirs or or just happened to know. And it split the cannabis vote in the community. And rather than getting somebody in, we didn't get anybody in. So, this time we have to be smart, and we want people to think about what they're doing before they, write anything down on that ballot paper.
Well, you're absolutely right. Jenny Hallam, it's been so great speaking with you. Now, we do have a couple of places where you're going to need to go, folks, to keep following Jenny and her saga. Now, I'm going to have you back on the show if you'll have us. And it'll probably happen before you go back to court, but we will have heard so many other wonderful things at that point. Is that okay?
That would be lovely.
We'll get you back on in a few months or so. We're blazing some new trails, getting a lot of people like yourself on, but we will want to come back to you.
Yep, that would be lovely. I'd be happy to come back again.
So we can find you. Like I said before, there's this page on Facebook. It's called ISupportJennyHallam.com. # hands off our healers. We support Jenny Hallam. So if you want to support Jenny and you want to understand what she's going through politically, legally, and most importantly, biologically, do get over there to Facebook. And she's also available at support Jenny Hallam. That's another support team of Jenny's. And, of course, Jenny is on Facebook as Jenny Hallam. Last name is Hands. Is that your original
That was
surname?
my maiden name. Yes, it was.
Your maiden name. So that's in Hanns. And Jenny is absolutely, as you can hear, very clear-spoken. This is the joke I hear. You know, everybody tries to chip away
Oh,
at this.
I know.
They make us all sound like Cheech and Chong. And no offense, I'm trying to get Tommy on the show. But not everybody's
no.
a vacuous stoner, and they were only playing those roles anyway. So
Exactly, and that's what people need to realise, that there's good, intelligent people that are cannabis users, and we're not all lazy stoners. So
Yeah.
it's time. It's time we get rid of that stigma.
it is definitely time to get rid of that stigma, and it's definitely time to get yourself at least a secondhand slow cooker, it sounds like, and an access to some good coconut oil.
That's right.
to go with the cannabis. So Jenny, we're going to let you go. We got some more things to do on the show before we leave, but I'm really happy to have met you on the phone, on the Skype, and we'll definitely have you back. And hold it together. There are people in the world that want to help you, and the more focus we can bring into people in a similar plight, the sooner you're going to be out of trouble, you know?
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for your time. I do appreciate it. But, we just want people to know that it's time to stand up and stop being scared to admit that you're a cannabis user or that you support cannabis. You're not a bad person for doing that. And, while people are scared, to stand up and admit it, that's why we're in the position we are. So stop being so scared. Stand up for cannabis today and admit that, you're a good, decent person.
That's it. Well, couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you so much for coming on. Jenny Hallam, we will definitely speak with you again. Good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
You're
Have
welcome.
a lovely day.
So that's Jenny. She is another powerhouse, and I'll bet there are at least one or two women like her in every single country that all of this stuff has anything to do with. We've met them in Ireland, and we're meeting them in Australia, and it's really time to take these people who are so self-important with their rituals and the voting and the political system that only allows you sometimes one, but maybe two different options at a time. It's really something we need to stand up for our rights and tell everybody that doesn't like it, tough. There's no way I'd be sitting here without that plant. And really, no way I'd really want to continue sitting here if I didn't have access to that plant. So that's Jenny Hallam. What a fantastic, strong, powerful voice, very knowledgeable. And once again, I would love to hear her in a courtroom. Not that I want her to go to court, but I'd love to hear her deal with these accusations about she's not really on top of it, and she doesn't really know what's going on, and she's not really all about the science, and the doctors say that what she says is not real, etc., and on it goes. It's very offensive to your awareness, and it's only slightly more offensive to people who have suffered some kind of malady that cannabis has turned them around from, and I obviously include myself in that particular group. So just before we get to the end of the show and sort of moving more into the conspiracy aspect of it, and I mean, how can you ignore the conspiracy aspect at this point? It's obviously a scam going on. Now listen to this. Jody Emery also was on the show. She's quite distressed right now because the Royal Bank in Canada has closed her account. This is someone in her 30s. She's had this bank account since she was a teenage babysitter. Lawyer here in Toronto says her account closure for conviction, because she was found, dealing and being involved with cannabis and selling it, and this is terrible now. They've been reprimanded. That her and her husband, Mark, have been reprimanded. Can't sell it anymore because now the cops are going to sell it. Now the government's going to sell it. She doesn't even have a bank account. She was distressed to learn that Royal Bank suddenly notified her it was closing her account and stopping her credit card. She says she has had that account since she's a little kid. She believes the bank is making the move because she has a criminal record for cannabis, and distressed to find out that she doesn't have banking abilities. Pay your rent, that kind of thing. That'll make it easier. In December, her and her husband, Mark Emery, the Prince of Pot, pleaded guilty to a number of drug-related charges in a Toronto court, were fined $200,000 each, And she says she needs the account to pay the penalty as well as to pay her rent. Who's not going to believe that? Why is this a problem for these people? She says that they're being discriminated against and people in her similar situation because a stigma that doesn't relate to any sort of dangerous or threatening behavior. And she hopes she can find a credit union or another bank to take her. A lawyer says he doesn't think that's exactly why she doesn't have the account, but I can't imagine why else she wouldn't. Thanks a lot, Royal Bank of Canada. Now, let's turn to Now. There's a publication in this city, and you can get it online at nowtoronto.com. Who's making a killing on weed? Here's a not-so-short list of ex-cops, politicians, and friends of Bill Blair, the police chief extraordinaire who's ushering in his red-nosed, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer alcoholically tinged legislation. Chuck Rafici, or is it Rafisi? Either way, here's what he's doing. He's the former chief financial officer of Justin Trudeau's Liberal Party of Canada. He's also a founder and a former CEO of Canopy Growth and Tweed Marijuana Inc., the country's largest licensed producer, and he made a killing when Canopy took over Tweed and is reportedly still a shareholder. Meanwhile, you might go to jail for 5 years for selling a joint if you don't have one. Currently CEO at Nesta Holding Company, the premier partner for companies within the cannabis space. His potential conflict of interest, according to Now, is as the former overseer of the finances of the Federal Liberal Party. His connections to moneybags contributors in the party run far and deep. No doubt he's turning a few of them onto the big bucks to be made in the business of weed. This is one of the main guys who got this thing pushed through. Him, along with, what's his name there? Stephen Bronfman, who, as we have detailed earlier on the show, have spent all kinds of time studying the family model of how rum running across the border when there was illegal alcoholic consumption rules in the States, and Canada was providing, Canada through Saskatchewan, through this guy's forebears, were profiting on it, and once it became legal, making tons of money. And they took that same template now, clearly, and they're using it with cannabis. Mark Zekulin, the president of Canopy Growth, also the company's legal counsel and former senior advisor to ex-Ontario Finance Minister Dwight Duncan. His potential conflict of interest, his resume includes a gig as a senior policy manager for the Business and Industry Advisory Committee to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. He boasts a high-profile and international corporate the OECD boasts high-profile local and international corporate clients, as well as counsel at the Ottawa, Washington international trade law firm of Cassidy Levy Kent. Norman Inkster, former head of the RCMP. Here's another cop. He's an independent director at Metrum Health Corporation, and if you look them up, you'll find a tainted cannabis scandal there. Like most of the licensed producers in this country that we are bound to deal with, as opposed to using our own freedom, picking it wherever we want to pick it, and buying it wherever we want to buy it, and giving it whenever we want to give it. The director at Metrum Health Corp, which was acquired by Canopy Growth last year at about this time. Potential conflict of interest, police and corporate connections. Norman Inkster is a member of the Canadian Association of the Chiefs of Police. Like they didn't have anything to do with this. Like they weren't for investing on this when they knew it was coming, while they were still arresting people. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police and the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And served as a member of the Investment Advisory Committee, a Bay Street investment firm, Westerkirk Capital, until 2005. Even Bill Blair has admitted there are some ideological and political aspects to this. Yeah, tell everybody that used to use it they're a criminal, and tell us all how you're going to be selling it now, and you're not a criminal. You lying scumbags. Hey, let's not also forget Kim Derry, former Toronto deputy chief, potential conflict of interest. He lobbied his old boss, Bill Blair, the government's point person on legalization, on behalf of the marijuana facility THC Meds Ontario, Inc., earlier this year to get rid of the goons in the budding industry and other people that used to know how it works and know how it works properly that are being labeled by these gangsters and opportunists. Hey, this is a big list. Here's the former Minister of Health, George Smitherman. He's an investor and a director of licensed producer THC Meds Ontario. He was re-entering politics, and he's going to run for a city council seat this fall. So he doesn't want dispensaries anywhere. He's involved in companies that are going to make a profit. Ernie Eves, the old conservative PC leader and premier of this province. He was the financial dude under Mike Harris before him. He's been conspicuous by his absence in the news lately, but he's busy with Timeless Herbal Care, a Jamaican medical marijuana company he joined as chair in 2015, at which he just inked a deal for one of 3 licenses approved to grow marijuana in Jamaica. This is another fine, law-abiding gentleman who used to scorn and issue scorn upon the users. Julian Fantino, former conservative MP, a federal MPP. He was also the OPP, Ontario Provincial Police Commissioner. He was also the Toronto Police Chief. He's also put a lot of people in jail for using cannabis, and he's now rolling around like a pig in the trough as the executive chair of Alifia Inc. Alifia. Now, there's a cannabis company you want to avoid. Let's not fatten their wallets any fatter than they already are. The company recently entered a $20 million financing agreement with Cannabo Medical Inc., so avoid them also. I'm calling for full-on boycotts, folks. If you didn't catch the name, just pause it, skip it back 10 seconds on your player, and write it down. Cannabo, Canada's largest physician-led referral-only clinics for medical cannabis. Potential conflict of interest after spending a career pushing reefer madness and once likened decriminalizing marijuana to murder, along with heroin comparisons, the former Toronto chief says he's turned over a new leaf. It's also just so happens that the director of the communications at Canopy, the largest licensed marijuana producer in the country, is also a former underling at Fantino's Veteran Affairs, when he was giving the folks a hard time back then as well. See, different political team doing the same thing. There's also Raf Sukar. He's a former undercover drug officer and an RCMP deputy commissioner and a current president and CEO of Alifia. Once again, boycott Alifia. Do not fatten their wallets. Do not do what they tell you. Too many lies to mention. And by not specifically pinning them down on anybody, I'm sure I'm avoiding some kind of conflict of interest myself by labeling people as certain things. But they are definitely involved in multiple series of potential conflicts of interest. Here's the dude that guides health policy in this province. Like I said earlier, the more people use it, the lower your costs are going to be. He used to be the president of Health Quality Ontario, Joshua Tepper. His potential conflict of interest was listed as an independent advisor to Metrum Limited between 2014 and 16 while he served as HQO head. Then there's John Reynolds, a Canadian Alliance MP and former Reform member. These guys are as far to the right as it gets. He's currently an advisor to Canada and a US-based medical and recreational marijuana business, Vodis Pharmaceuticals, VODIS Pharmaceuticals, says he's never smoked it, doesn't want to. And that should tell you all you need to know about why he is shilling for Big Pharma. Senator Larry Campbell has a potential conflict of interest. He's declared it's not, though, because he's an advisor to Votis, says it's not a conflict, but I think it is. Mike Harcourt, former BC Premier and Mayor, has a potential conflict of interest. He's got a company called True Leaf Medicine. The U.S. Security and Exchange Commission recently approved a share offering that will allow the company to crowdfund up to $10 million, and Jody Emery can't even get a bank account. Herb Dallowall, former Vancouver MP and federal cabinet minister, oh God, he's got a conflict of interest. You know what? I've got a huge list here of potential conflicts of interest. Cash Heed, former BC Solicitor General. He's balls deep in some weed money. Cam Batley, former legislative assistant to the Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs in the 90s. And a former director of communications for Eli Lilly, a pharmaceutical company. The parent company in the U.S. has developed one of the first marijuana-based drugs approved for nausea and vomiting in cancer patients from chemotherapy. Here's another thing you can do. You can take the cannabis itself and potentially avoid chemotherapy altogether. There's no way to avoid the nausea better than not using that stuff. and so on. And Neil Bellow and Jake Ryan and Barry Daniel. He's a former Abbotsford police chief. That's also in BC. Busted a lot of people for weed for sure. Now he's the current advisor to BC-based Wildflower Marijuana. I guess what I'm saying in the long run is find out who's selling. Just like in the old days in high school. Find out who's selling, how much they're selling for, what they're involved in, and if they used to be a police officer. Come on, man. Find some modicum of fairness in your system and in your body, and then decide that this is an awful turn of events, okay? An awful turn of events to have all these police at the trough, all these restrictive lies, all these denials of what's going on with this fantastic, healthful property. So, just as we wrap it up, my message once again is thank you, Sam Malachi. We are going to cover your situation as we get involved with your book and promoting it and the knowledge within. And right now, I would just like to close out the show by thanking Jenny Hallam and everybody that's been listening. And we will be back next week with another Green Crush, another fantastic guest, more facts than you could shake a stick at. And it's really very exciting to be bringing this news forward. It's super important. Your life may depend on it. I never imagined once I stopped casually smoking cannabis that I would be in a situation where I would need it to turn my life around. So please be open-minded. Please be open-minded while you investigate the potential healing factors of cannabis. And if you're listening, that bell has tolled twice while we raise our fists. I'll thank you now for tuning in. Sorry about the live broadcast not happening, but you're already listening to it on podcast. What do you care? We'll be back next week with a fantastic time. This is Alan Park, Green Crush Conspiracy Theories and Queries and Situations. We're going to be digging deeper into all of these things right on up to whenever Justin Trudeau says the new system is in place. Thanks for listening to Green Crush. We'll talk to you again another time.